The Fourth Crusade was a Western European armed expedition originally intended to conquer Muslim-controlled Jerusalem by means of an invasion through Egypt. Instead, a sequence of events culminated in the Crusaders sacking the city of Constantinople, the capital of the Christian-controlled Byzantine Empire, in January 1203, en route to Jerusalem. The majority of the Crusader leadership entered into an agreement with the Byzantine prince Alexios Angelos to divert to Constantinople and restore his deposed father as emperor. The intention of the Crusaders was then to continue to the Holy Land with promised Byzantine financial and military assistance. On 23 June 1203 the main Crusader fleet reached Constantinople. Smaller contingents continued to occur. In August 1203, following clashes outside Constantinople, Alexios Angelos was crowned as co-emperor with Crusader support. However, in January 1204, he was deposed by a popular uprising in Constantinople. The Western Crusaders were no longer able to receive their promised payments, and when Alexios IV was murdered on 8 February 1204, the Crusaders and Venetians decided on the outright conquest of Constantinople. In April 1204, they captured and brutally sacked the city, and set up a new Latin empire as well as partitioning other Byzantine territories between themselves. Byzantine resistance based in unconquered sections of the empire such as Nicaea, Trebizond, and Epirus ultimately recovered Constantinople. The Fourth Crusade is considered to be one of the final acts in the Great Schism between the Eastern Orthodox Church and Roman Catholic Church, and a key turning point in the decline of the Byzantine Empire. Background: Ayyubid Sultan Saladin had conquered most of the Frankish, Latin kingdom of Jerusalem, including the ancient city itself, in 1187. The kingdom had been established 88 years before, after the capture and sack of Jerusalem in the First Crusade. The city was sacred to Christians, Muslims and Jews, and returning it to Christian hands had been a primary purpose of the First Crusade. Saladin led a Muslim dynasty, and his incorporation of Jerusalem into his domains shocked and dismayed the Catholic countries of Western Europe. Legend has it that Pope Urban III literally died of the shock, but the timing of his death makes that impossible. The Crusader states had been reduced to 3 cities along the sea coast: Tyre, Tripoli, and Antioch. The Third Crusade reclaimed much territory for the Kingdom of Jerusalem, including the key towns of Acre and Jaffa, but had failed to retake Jerusalem. The Crusade had also been marked by a significant escalation in long-standing tensions between the feudal states of Western Europe and the Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople. The experiences of the first 2 Crusades had thrown into stark relief the vast cultural differences between the 2 Christian civilizations. The Latins viewed the Byzantine preference for diplomacy and trade over war as duplicitous and degenerate, and their policy of tolerance and assimilation towards Muslims as a corrupt betrayal of the faith. For their part, the educated and wealthy Byzantines maintained a strong sense of cultural, organizational, and social superiority over the Latins. Constantinople had been in existence for 874 years at the time of the Fourth Crusade and was the largest and most sophisticated city in Christendom. Almost alone amongst major medieval urban centers, it had retained the civic structures, public baths, forums, monuments, and aqueducts of classical Rome in working form. At its height, the city held an estimated population of about 500,000 people behind 13 miles of triple walls. Its planned location made Constantinople not only the capital of the surviving eastern part of the Roman Empire but also a commercial center that dominated trade routes from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea, China, India and Persia. As a result, it was both a rival and a tempting target for the aggressive new states of the West, notably the Republic of Venice. One of the leaders of the Third Crusade, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa, openly plotted with the Serbs, Bulgars, Byzantine traitors, and even the Muslim Seljuks against the Eastern Empire, and at one point sought papal support for a crusade against the Orthodox Byzantines. Crusaders also seized the breakaway Byzantine province of Cyprus, rather than return it to the empire. Richard I of England sold the island to the Knights Templar. Barbarossa died on crusade, and his army quickly disintegrated, leaving the English and French, who had come by sea, to fight Saladin. In 1195 Henry VI, son and heir of Barbarossa, sought to efface this humiliation by declaring a new crusade, and in the summer of 1197 a large number of German knights and nobles, headed by 2 archbishops, 9 bishops, and 5 dukes, sailed for Palestine. There they captured Sidon and Beirut, but at the news of Henry's death in Messina along the way, many of the nobles and clerics returned to Europe. Deserted by much of their leadership, the rank-and-file crusaders panicked before an Egyptian army and fled to the ships in Tyre. Also in 1195 the Byzantine Emperor Isaac II Angelos was deposed in favor of his brother by a palace coup. Ascending as Alexios III Angelos, the new emperor had his brother blinded and exiled. Ineffectual on the battlefield, Isaac had also proven to be an incompetent ruler who had let the treasury dwindle and outsourced the navy to the Venetians. His actions in wastefully distributing military weapons and supplies as gifts to his supporters had undermined the empire's defenses. The new emperor was to prove no better. Anxious to shore up his position, Alexios bankrupted the treasury. His attempts to secure the support of semi-autonomous border commanders undermined central authority. He neglected his crucial responsibilities for defense and diplomacy. The emperor's chief admiral, Michael Strathnos, reportedly sold the fleet's equipment down to the very nails to enrich himself. The crusade begins. Pope Innocent III succeeded to the papacy in January 1198, and the preaching of a new crusade became the prime goal of his pontificate. Expounded in his bull Post Miserabile, his call was largely ignored by the European monarchs. The Germans were struggling against papal power, and England and France were still engaged in warfare against each other. However, due to the preaching of Fulk of Neuilly, a crusading army was finally organized at a tournament held at Écrit-sur-Aisne by Count Thibaut of Champagne in 1199. Thibaut was elected leader, but he died in 1201 and was replaced by an Italian count, Boniface of Montferrat. Boniface and the other leaders sent envoys to Venice, Genoa, and other city-states in 1200 to negotiate a contract for transport to Egypt. The object of the crusade, one of the envoys, was the future historian Geoffrey of Villehardouin. Earlier crusades focused on Palestine had involved the slow movement of large and disorganized land hosts across a generally hostile Anatolia. Egypt was now the dominant Muslim power in the eastern Mediterranean, but also a major trading partner of Venice. An attack on Egypt would clearly be a maritime enterprise, requiring the creation of a fleet. Genoa was uninterested, but in March 1201 negotiations were opened with Venice, which agreed to transport 33,500 crusaders, a very ambitious number. This agreement required a full year of preparation on the part of the Venetians to build numerous ships and train the sailors who would man them, all the while curtailing the city's commercial activities. The crusading army was expected to consist of 4,500 knights, 9,000 squires, and 20,000 foot soldiers. The majority of the crusading army that set out from Venice in early October 1202 originated from areas within France. It included men from Blois, Champagne, Amiens, Saint-Pol, the Ile-de-France, and Burgundy. Several other regions of Europe sent substantial contingents as well, such as Flanders and Montferrat. Other notable groups came from the Holy Roman Empire, including the men under Bishop Martin of the Paris Abbey and Bishop Conrad of Halberstadt, together in alliance with the Venetian soldiers and sailors led by the Doge, Enrico Dandolo. The Crusade was to be ready to sail on the 24th of June 1203 and make directly for the Irbid capital, Cairo. This agreement was ratified by Pope Innocent, with a solemn ban on attacks on Christian states. Attack on Zara. Main article. Siege of Zara. There was no binding agreement among the Crusaders that all should sail from Venice. Accordingly, many chose to sail from other ports, particularly Flanders, Marseille, and Genoa. By May 1202 the bulk of the Crusader army was collected at Venice, although with far smaller numbers than expected, about 12,000 instead of 33,500. The Venetians had performed their part of the agreement. There awaited 50 war galleys and 450 transports, enough for 3 times the assembled army. The Venetians, under their aged and blind Doge Dandolo, would not let the Crusaders leave without paying the full amount agreed to, originally 85,000 silver marks. The Crusaders could only initially pay 35,000 silver marks. The Doge threatened to keep them interned unless full payment was made, so a further 14,000 marks was collected, and that only by reducing the Crusaders to extreme poverty. This was disastrous to the Venetians, who had halted their commerce for a great length of time to prepare this expedition. In addition, about 14,000 men, or as many as 20–30,000 men, were needed to man the entire fleet, placing further strain on the Venetian economy. Dandolo and the Venetians considered what to do with the Crusade. It was too small to pay its fee, but disbanding the force gathered would harm Venetian prestige and cause significant financial and trading loss. Following the massacre of the Latins of Constantinople in 1182, the ruling Angelo's dynasty had expelled the Venetian merchant population with the support of the Greek population. These events gave the Venetians a hostile attitude towards Byzantium, but it remains unclear if Constantinople was always intended to be the target, an issue that remains under fierce debate today. Dandolo, who joined the crusade during a public ceremony in the church of San Marco di Venezia, proposed that the Crusaders pay their debts by intimidating many of the local ports and towns down the Adriatic, culminating in an attack on the port of Zara in Dalmatia. The city had been dominated economically by Venice throughout the 12th century, but had rebelled in 1181 and allied itself with King Emeric of Hungary. Subsequent Venetian attempts to recover control of Zara had been repulsed, and by 1202 the city was economically independent, under the protection of the king. The Hungarian king was Catholic and had himself agreed to join the Fourth Crusade. Many of the Crusaders were opposed to attacking Zara, and some, including a force led by the elder Simon de Montfort, refused to participate altogether and returned home, while the papal legate to the crusade, Cardinal Peter of Capua, endorsed the move as necessary to prevent the crusade's complete failure. The Pope was alarmed at this development and wrote a letter to the crusading leadership threatening excommunication. In 1202, Pope Innocent III, despite wanting to secure papal authority over Byzantium, forbade the Crusaders of Western Christendom from committing any atrocious acts against their Christian neighbors. However, this letter was concealed from the bulk of the army, who arrived at Zara on 10–11 November 1202, and the attack proceeded. The citizens of Zara made reference to the fact that they were fellow Catholics by hanging banners marked with crosses from their windows and the walls of the city. But nevertheless the city fell on the 24th of November 1202 after a brief siege. There was extensive pillaging, and the Venetians and other crusaders came to blows over the division of the spoils. Order was achieved, and the leaders of the expedition agreed to winter in Zara, while considering their next move. The fortifications of Zara were demolished by the Venetians. When Innocent III heard of the sack, he sent a letter to the Crusaders excommunicating them and ordering them to return to their holy vows and head for Jerusalem. Out of fear that this would dissolve the army, the leaders of the crusade decided not to inform their followers of this. In any event, Innocent shortly reconsidered his decision, regarding the Crusaders as having been blackmailed by the Venetians. In February 1203 he rescinded the excommunications against all non-Venetians in the expedition.